Okay. Thinks we are live. So good morning to everybody, to all the participants, to the speakers, and of course to all our followers and friends who are following us on through this webinar, as well as on Facebook, since we are broadcasting live on Facebook. So thank you very much. We are here for a webinar. The title is Power Parity, Getting to a New Normal in Political Representation. And the question, of course, that everybody will have is how. So during this webinar and a second one, which will follow later in August, we will look at the how. We are starting with the political aspect, how get to parity in politics. I would like to introduce the co-hosts of this webinar. They are represented by two women whose career has been marked by many firsts. Two women who have endlessly working towards ensuring, fighting, I could say, towards achieving a higher presence of women and women leaders in politics, in society, and in the economics. I would first give the floor to Silvana Koch-Marin, President and founder of Women Political Leaders, the first of this kind broad international network of female politicians. Silvana Koch-Marin has a long experience in politics. She also served as Vice President of the European Parliament from 2009 to 2011, and she was member of the European Parliament for more than 10 years. And today she's also sharing her experience, her insights, while sitting on the board of various organizations to ensure that women have a seat at the table. So Silvana Koch-Marin has also represented the European Union since 2016 in the Executive Committee of W20. And Silvana Koch-Marin will be accompanied by Thoraya Obaid, Chair of Women 20, who indeed are the two sponsors, co-hosts, I would say, of this webinar. I will give first the floor to Silvana.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this important webinar. Well, it's a webinar which is the first of a series in which women political leaders and W20 are joining forces during the G20 Saudi presidency. And indeed, one of the G20 presidency's priorities is inclusive decision-making. I would like to really thank Thoraya Obaid, Dr. Thoraya Obaid and W20 for this partnership, which means a lot to us. Because when you hear the word political leader, who do you think of? A man or a woman? If we're honest, probably in front of our inner eye, it's most likely a man. And the response is in the numbers, because today, 93% of the world's heads of state and government are men, and more than 3/4 of seats in parliaments are occupied by men. And only one of the G20 leaders is a woman, as a point in case. There's very little change. The WEF, the World Economic Forum's annual Global Gender Gap report, states that in political representation, the gap is by far the biggest. And the number of years needed to close this gap so that the same number of women as men are in political representation, this number of years remains stable at more than 100 years. So the removal of barriers for women in political leadership demands policy intervention, and it demands legislative change. Today's speakers, whom I thank for their time and availability, have been advocating for and acting on inclusive decision-making throughout their careers and work, both in their political work and beyond. And we have real champions here from W20 involvement, from G20 countries, and also from countries which are showing us that it actually can be done, that this kind of equality and representation is not a dream, but is happening in some of these places in the world. So to succeed, women and men need to work together, and we look forward to hearing the experiences on what to do and how to remove such barriers. Because only with more women leaders we can have a future that is more equitable, more inclusive, and more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvana Kupmarin. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Thoraya Obaid, Chair of Women 20. But of course, talking about women who have marked their career with many firsts, I would like to briefly, if it's necessary, introduce Dr. Obaid, Chair of the Women 20, the official engagement group of G20, and the first Arab woman to head a UN agency. So the United Nations Population Fund, specifically focused on the role of education and health for women, where she worked for 10 years. And Dr. Thoraya Obaid was described by Secretary General Kofi Annan as the ideal candidate to head that agency. And I think this says a lot, and as well says a lot about the role of men in ensuring equality. Thoraya Obaid is one of the first Saudi women to be appointed as a member of the Shura Council, so the Consultative Council, and where she served for 3 years. And she's member of several councils, always ensuring that the role of women does not go neglected. In her career, Thoraya Obaid contributed to various changes in government policies at national and hopefully international level. So with this, I would like to give the floor to you, Dr. Obaid.
Thank you again, Lucia. Third time I tell you thank you again for this introduction. And I thank Silvana for inviting the W20 to partner with WPL in this important webinar. And we look forward to future interactions as well. And thank you for asking the right question. When you hear the word leader, who do you think of? And I don't think it's just about leader, but even more specifically, just to give a few examples: president, vice president, director, engineer, and even doctor and lawyer. And yes, it's time for all of us to reimagine what a leader looks like in the new society. We are all working together to rebuild back better again. We at W20 have adopted a set of pillars on inclusions for women in labor, in finance, and in digital technology that constitute legacy from the previous W20 summits. However, by simply looking around, for example, and you gave the example, Silvana, only one woman is among the G20 leaders. And by reviewing evidence-based conclusions, we recognize that this inclusion cannot be realized unless women are consciously included in decision-making, and thus it became our fourth pillar for W20. Studies have shown that when women are included in decision-making at the various levels of responsibilities, from the family to the community to the state, in both public and private institutions, they bring different perspectives to the discussion. They enrich the content and lead to a more comprehensive decision-making results that respond to the demands and needs of all society, both women and men, young and old. So within this context, W20 members are asking G20 leaders to adopt a set of policies for which W20 has indicated accountability is the backbone. I will highlight two of them, since they touch directly on our webinar today and on the new imagined Building Back Better world. W20 calls for, 1, ensuring equal representation of women in both governmental and private sector settings at all levels of decision-making, and 2, adopting gender-responsive budgeting approaches through the collection of sex-disaggregated data to ensure a gender-equitable world. And we know that all cultures, in one way or another, are not free from gender biases, actively pursued or subconsciously exercised. And this impacts on the parity in leadership that we are all seeking. It is critical thus to adopt a variety of programs that address such culturally based biases, because it's the way to liberate the society from injustices and to ensure a society that has built back better for all. I really look forward to the follow discussion because I know it will enrich all of us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baid. So I think now we can start the discussions, and I would like to give the floor to Salma Al-Rashid, Sherpa to the G20 and Executive Director of W20, who, thanks to her long experience in the social sector, oversaw various development projects, always with a focus on women's and women's empowerment. And Salma is currently the Chief Advocacy Officer as Al-Lanhada Society, and had the opportunity to participate through her work at various activities at local level to ensure that influence of women or the role of women in policy and to work hand in hand with decision makers. I would also like to remind everybody that who's watching us that you are, it's possible to send up questions through the chat, that's the Q&A, which is available here at the bottom. Usually you have your screen, so please send us the questions. We'll try to address as many as possible. With this, Salma would give the floor to you, because you will act as a moderator of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Your Excellencies, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It's an absolute great honor for me to introduce our esteemed panelists of international political leaders. With us today, and forgive me for the pronunciation, I did some practice, Ms. Gabriela Cuevas Barron of Mexico, Member of Congress and President of the Interparliamentary Union, Mr. Gudlaugur Þórðarson, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iceland, Mr. Jose Manuel Barroso, Chair of Goldman Sachs International, WPL Global Advisory Board Member, former President of the European Commission and Prime Minister of Portugal, Ms. Yoko Kamikawa of Japan, Member of the House of Representatives, WPL Country Ambassador, and Chair for Promoting Dynamic Engagement of All Citizens. Our distinguished speakers today will discuss ways to ensure equitable access for women to political positions. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us how women, despite playing a key role in many areas, are still missing from the decision-making process. Currently, of the 195 countries we have around the world, only 19 are led by women. Most of them, throughout the first few months of the pandemic, had in common a relative success in fighting the virus. We will hear from our esteemed panelists on how to ensure women are equally represented at all levels of decision-making. This is a topic in which we should all be deeply interested in, because it's only by ensuring a gendered perspective will the world be able to build back better. Before we get started, I would like to reiterate what Lucia mentioned of utilizing the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will address the Q&A at the end of the session. All titles preserved and respected. We begin with you, Ms. Cuevas Barron. According to the 2020 World Bank Women, Business and the Law report, which analyzes laws and regulation affecting women's economic inclusion in 190 economies, only 8 countries worldwide have acknowledged the principle of economic equality between women and men in their legislation. What can you do as a leader to ensure that the international community acts faster by adopting and enforcing policies that treat men and women equally? The floor is yours, Ms. Cuevas Barron.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Silvana, for this invitation. Thank you, Dr. Thoraya, also for this wonderful event. I think that we need to understand, first of all, that the pandemic is not going to end with a health crisis. It is also having important economic effects. And every time that the world has faced an economic crisis, the most affected are women and girls. And that's why we need also not only to have this important perspective on building back better, but to have a last name. It has to be a feminist building back better. We need to have gender lenses. We are facing an unprecedented global crisis. This crisis is revealing the strengths and weaknesses of our societies and all those inequalities. Again, the deeper one is precisely the one that is related to women and girls. If we go, for example, to see on health practitioners and health services, 70% of the workers are women. But sometimes, now that we are calling them essential workers, we need also to recognize that in most of the cases, they are not being recognized with the proper salaries, with equal opportunities, with all the social services that must be included for helping women not only to dream and to develop their dreams, but also to facilitate their work, their responsibilities with their families, with all the people that they are taking care of. Today, gender discrimination in law still impacts 2.5 billion of women and girls worldwide. On top of that, 1 in 3 women across the globe will suffer inter-partner or sexual violence in their lifetime. De facto discrimination and violence against women, as well as the gender pay gap, have been widened by the COVID-19 crisis. The task is immense, and with a crisis at an unprecedented scale, scarce resources may slip away from those who need them most, again, especially women. We must seize the momentum of this crisis to guarantee equality between men and women in all areas of life. The law is the beginning of all institutions. It's the beginning of everything that the state has to do. But for it to be fully implemented, we need to show the money. As parliamentarians, yes, we do have different responsibilities. And I think that when we want to talk about leadership and about the political leaders in parliaments, it means that we need to show political will and results, full determination to bring solutions in terms of changing those legislations that are still discriminating, but also showing a real commitment when it comes to budget. If we are allocating budget, we cannot forget which are the priorities. Silvana was mentioning some important statistics. At the Interparliamentary Union, we have been for a year collecting statistics about the presence of women in parliament. And I agree with her, we cannot be optimistic because 25 years ago, the presence of women in parliaments were about 11%, and now it's 24.9%. Yes, it is much better, it is, but it is very far from achieving gender parity. The world has equal men than women, perhaps even more women. We need also to reflect that priorities in the parliament. And if the women's voices are not represented in parliament, we are not going to be represented in the legislation and certainly not in the budget allocation. The economic empowerment and financial inclusion of women should be our priority #1 today. We need to embed gender budgeting and gender justice in our laws. We must ensure that social protection schemes, taxation, investment, and public procurement policies benefit women and men equally. We need to remove all pieces of legislation that hold women back and prevent them from accessing resources, pursuing their careers, and making choices for their own lives. We need to be honest. For example, if we talk about violence against women, well, we can design beautiful institutions, beautiful legislation, but at the end, if a woman is not sure that she's going to receive a salary or that she's going to have an income, she's not going to be able to protect her children. So perhaps she's going to tolerate a lot of violence from her partner or spouse or some husband or something because she needs it. She has no choices. So we need to give them those opportunities. The economic empowerment, the financial inclusion, it is not only like one chapter of a person's life. It is related to having access to all different opportunities, and that includes the freedom on deciding to escape from a violent environment. It is also about the freedom of participating in politics. We cannot expect, for example, a woman to get involved in politics if she is not going to have a safe environment for the children, for her parents, for her community. We are very responsible. That's the very good side also as women. And that is related also to our results when we are in leadership positions. If we see the results that the female heads of state are having during this COVID-19 pandemic, it is clear that it is not only about having empathy. It is not only about leadership. It is not only about being smart. It is a very harmonious combination. And these women are being able to have their people's trust because they know what their families are experiencing. And we need, as parliamentarians, to have also that same empathy, intelligence, commitment to bring to Parliament a new chapter in legislation without any discrimination, without equal opportunity, for example, in terms of property rights. Come on, we are in the 21st century. It is not acceptable that women are not having the same rights, property rights as men. The same happens with a banking account or access for subsidies, for financial empowerment. And at the end, all these changes needs to start from the parliaments, from making better legislation. But then we need to go to a second step, which is how are we going to involve the private sector? For example, allow me to use my country as a case. We changed the constitution, and now I am from Mexico, by the way, and we changed the constitution, and now it is our mandate to have gender parity. This is the first legislature in Mexico that is having gender parity. But if we go and take a look to what's happening, for example, at the biggest businesses, only one of the most important business persons is a woman. So we need also to go further. We need to design better incentives. We need to give, again, taxes, subsidies. We need to have gender lenses to compensate all the injustices that are already there. That's part of our duty. It's not only to say we're going to be equal. That's very difficult to say when we are coming from a history of discrimination, a long history of leaving women behind. So this is part of what we need to do as parliamentarians, to understand that gender equality in politics needs to be a priority in building back better in a very comprehensive way. Also, I think that an important part of this conversation is precisely what's happening in the G20. G20 members such as Spain, Finland, Austria, Sweden, France, Canada, some countries are making an important effort to look for gender parity. Again, I already spoke about my country in Mexico, where we're looking for an equal cabinet. Yes, I think that gender quotas are important. It can be very uncomfortable for a lot of countries. Every time that I am starting to speak about gender quotas with the IPU members or some other auditoriums, there are some questions that I believe that we need to change. For example, there's this issue on, well, are you going to designate a seat only because we are dealing with women? It is not about being smart or being popular as a politician. Well, I think that no one asked that to men. Politics were designed by men. The language that we use in politics is a male language. So yes, we do need affirmative action. We need institutional changes to have cultural changes, to remove all cultural barriers. And I think in this regard that the G20 countries have a very important responsibility. The G20 countries are those ones that are having the biggest economies, and they need to lead by example. We cannot ask all the world to be inclusive if the most important economies are not willing to do so. So I'm really happy to participate in this conversation, because I think that we need to do more. We need to show how law can be changed. We need to show how budgets can have a gender perspective. We need to show how we can engage the private sector in order to have equal societies. I think that we can make a difference, but we need to start with these important conversations and to understand that this is about, yes, a moment for crisis, yes, a very challenging moment for humanity, but also a moment that is going to be particularly cruel against women and girls. And then we have a bigger responsibility to build back better with a feminist, with a sustainable agenda. I'm sure that we can do that, but we need to be working hand by hand and to understand that we all, men and women, share this responsibility. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation, and thank you very much, and congratulations for these partnerships.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And with that, I think I'll echo what Silvana said in the beginning. We don't have to dream. This is a possibility. And I will connect to what you said, Ms. Cuevas-Baron. With that, with a focus on a feminist approach and a whole of government approach, I move on to our next speaker, Your Excellency, Mr. Thordarson. My question is, how can governments lead the way in making sure that women have equal access to leadership positions and representation in politics and policy-making bodies, whether it's ministerial, domestic, international, and so on? What can governments do? If you could share with us a few thoughts, please, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I first of all would like to thank both the women political leaders and Women 20 for inviting me to take part in this webinar. I'm glad to be able to contribute to this discussion and look forward to seeing the outcomes and recommendation. This is a big question, and but I might think that some of the things that we have done in Iceland in the past decades is something that could be useful in the discussion. But because for 11 consecutive years, Iceland has been ranked at the top of the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index. This is something we are proud of and comes with a responsibility to lead by example when it comes to gender equality. In this regard, equal access to leadership position in politics and policy-making bodies is very important to us. For example, we have introduced special measures and legislations such as equal pay, paid parental leave, and subsequently an exclusive paternity leave, affordable daycare, and gender quotas. These special measures contribute directly to the high levels of women labor participation, the highest of the OECD countries. We aim to highlight these measures in the international community as well. On that note, I would like to use this opportunity to mention that the UN adopted a proposal from Iceland to declare an International Equal Pay Day, which we hope you will celebrate with us for the first time on September the 18th. It is evident that along with special measures, social norms have changed. Political participation of women is relatively high, and prominent female leaders, including our Prime Minister, are positive role models. And I think it's important to stress that, because we have seen these changes in the last few decades, I would say, in my lifetime. It is a win-win situation. Gender equality is not only for women, it's also for men. And I think it's important to recognize that we have made these changes in a very relatively short time. And there's no political organization, there's no political leader, there's no political party who wants to go back. And it must mean that this is a win-win for both men and women. But changing social norm is key, And in order to be successful, we must engage men. Iceland has introduced initiatives both domestically and internationally that focus on encouraging men and boys to become actively engaged in promoting gender equality. We have systematically encouraged the participation of men and boys in this debate, as underpinned by Iceland's active role in the He for She campaign of UN Women and the development of the Partnership Conference and its toolkit. The partnership events has taken place in our parliament as well as in international organizations. For governments to become successful in leading the way in gender equality efforts, we must, and I stress, engage men. And male leaders have a responsibility to get with the program. I believe male engagement and increased awareness is an important contributor in cultivating a new normal, where inclusive decision-making processes become the rule for political representation. And finally, I would like to add that Iceland is now co-leading an action coalition in UN Women Generation Equality campaign. We are honored and proud to partake in this important work to accelerate the implementation of global commitments to gender equality.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. His Excellency mentioned quotas, a key word, and with that, I'd like to move to our next speaker, Mr. Barroso. Goldman Sachs announced in Davos that it will carry out IPOs only for companies that have at least one woman or non-white board member. Please tell us how positive measures such as required candidate quotas, reserved seats for women candidates, financial incentives, and greater legal sanctions for failing to carry out these measures can be an effective way to achieve equal representation for women in leadership positions. The floor is yours, Mr. Barroso. Your Excellency, can you please unmute? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Very well.
Sorry. I was thanking you and also thanking Silvana for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be with you in this kind of initiatives. And let me also congratulate you, Silvana, and all the other committed leaders for your commitment to this agenda. I would like to say that I'm also delighted that the Saudi presidency of G20 is committed to this issue of inclusive decision-making. And I believe we have here an opportunity to move forward this very relevant agenda. So trying to respond directly to your question, Salma, regarding Goldman Sachs, yes, I'm very proud that our CEO announced in Davos this commitment. It's certainly an important signal. And it's important to understand that in the financial sector, we are really lagging behind in terms of gender diversity. I was quite, even worse, I would say, the situation than in politics, at least in Western European countries and in the West world in general. There is not sufficient representation of women at important levels of decision-making. I'm as chair of the board of Goldman Sachs International. I'm committed to it. Now we have 1/3 of women. In fact, the Goldman Sachs business principle number 7 says, and I quote, "For us to be successful, our people must reflect diversity of the communities and cultures in which we operate. That means we must attract, retain, and motivate people from many backgrounds and perspectives. Being diverse is not optional, it is what we must be." So this concept of diversity has to do with the overall concept of fairness and justice. It's a question at the end of human rights. Why should half of mankind not be represented? So that's, I think, a fundamental principle of justice, but it is also a question of the quality of decision-making. We have now many empirical studies that show that bodies, including boards of companies or political bodies or civil society institutions, they take better decisions when they are more diverse. Why? Because the world is complex. And to manage an increased level of complexity, we can do better if we have an increased level of variety, of diversity in our body, because we can better process that information. So it's also a question of competence. So diversity typically enhances the quality of decision. Beyond the aspect of justice, it's also a matter of quality, competence, efficiency in bodies, be it in the private sector, corporate sector, or in the public and political scenarios as well. And that's basically the rationale for this. By the way, now we have at Goldman Sachs some aspirational goals. 50% of all analysts and entry-level associates have to be women by next year, 50%. So the parity is there. It means those who come at the lowest level, but afterwards can progress, 50%, the recruitment is parity. 9% of all analysts and entry-level associates in the UK should be Black professionals by next year. And that reflects more or less the percentage of Black population in our society in the UK. And 30% senior women representation by 2023 in some of our, let's say, entities at Goldman Sachs. So it's still 30%, it's still not parity, but we are going on the right track. So as it was said by Gabriela just now, there is progress, but that progress has not been sufficient. Also now, speaking politically, if I may say so, if I can share my experience with you, when I was leader of the European Commission, we were, in fact, together with the European Parliament, Silvana at that time was also very active as a leader in the European Parliament, we were able to establish at least 1/3. It's not in the legislation, but it was now the practice in the European Commission of 1/3 of women in the body. And we had to fight hard because the governments now in the European Union, they send one person for the European Commission, and most of them, the temptation is to send men. So now the practice has become to ask for 2 names. Just now there is an issue in the European Commission. One commissioner had to resign, and now the president of the Commission, my successor, not my immediate successor, but Ursula von der Leyen, she's asking the Irish government to send 1 man and 1 woman. So, and now it became established practice. So this is the kind of change that I believe can have some positive effects. So I would say legislative change, but also sometimes cultural change with some of these tools. Sometimes soft legislation, like recommendations in European Union terms, sometimes hard legislation, binding legislation, be it at national level or at European Union level. During my time in the Commission, one of the most controversial decisions we took, it was a really very big debate, was to impose quotas on listed companies. And I can tell you, we had a rebellion of several governments, including governments led by women, like my good friend Angela Merkel, which she's really a good friend, political friend, and not only political friend. Her argument was subsidiarity, saying you should not do that at European level. That's for us to do it at national level. Yes, but the reality is that it was not done at national level. And then we have done it not as hard legislation, but as a recommendation. And the reality is that the simple fact the European Commission announced that recommendation made most important companies, listed companies, to start to promote this kind of gender diversity by quotas. So I'm in favor of quotas. I know that's a very debatable issue. I know also when I was Prime Minister in Portugal, the biggest opponent to quotas was my number 2 in the government. She was a woman. She was a Minister of State and Finance Minister. Her argument was that if we do that, it will appear that we women that are in important positions of power, we are there because we are women and not because of our competence. I can understand that argument, but I do not agree with it. This is the kind of matter where we need some legislation to create the right incentives for the different entities, the corporate entities or the governments to change. So it's a kind of a dialectical relationship between culture in society and legislation promoted by the parliaments, the governments, or in the European Union, the supranational bodies, the European Commission. And that will be my advice, that we stay committed to quotas at political level and also in corporate governance. And I think it will be important that the W20 and the G20, they come with a strong statement on this direction. So I want to conclude saying that I fully support the call, the W20 call for parity in political decision-making. That will be a way of respecting the fundamental principles of justice, but also of improving the quality of decision-making. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you for giving that strong statement on a really important issue, whether it's hard quotas or suggestions or recommendations. With that, I'd like to move to Ms. Kamikawa. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted our lives, and our hearts and thoughts go out to all those who have been affected, lost loved ones, and are struggling on different levels. But crises offer an exceptional, we can call it, opportunity to create a new normal and to rebuild social frameworks so that women are given a seat at the decision-making table. What steps are Your Excellency taking to ensure that the lessons learned from this pandemic do not go to waste? How can we use this to remove social, legal, and economic barriers and further advance the inclusion of women in leadership positions? The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Women 20 members, WPL leaders, honorable speakers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, moderator Salma and Silvana, WPL founder. Very nice to see you again. First, I am very pleased that W20 and WPL jointly hold a conference today under the theme of getting a new normal in political presentation, and that the outcome will be a recommendation to G20 leaders. Currently in Japan, now choosing the very important period to choose prime minister, new prime minister. So I'm very much struggle with the competing among the candidates. Before I answer the questions, last year, Japan had the honor of hosting the W20 in March and the WPL summit in June. Over 3,000 audience joined the W20 and over 300 female politicians gathered at the WPL summit. A special event for women's empowerment was held at the G20 summit in Osaka, and recommendations were exchanged by the leaders. The essence was integrated in the G20 leaders' declaration. I believe international solidarity and momentum for gender equality has been strengthened recently. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has spread all over the world, affects the vulnerable people seriously and expands the inequality. Disparity may widen and society may be divided. UN April report on women described that with the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, even the limited gains made in the past decades are at risk of being rolled back. We, women leaders, need to rebuild network and strengthen solidarity to protect women's rights, protect gender equality, and support people in need. We need to respond firmly to the current crisis, especially paying attention to the impact on women and girls, and take a step to realize better and gender equal new normal. The UN report showed 5 major impacts of the pandemic on women. 1, economic impacts. 2nd, health impacts. 3rd, unpaid care work. 4th, gender-based violence. 5, impacts on humanitarian and fragile settings and on human rights. Briefly, I would like to describe the economic impacts on women and gender-based violence in Japan, and then talk about women's political participation. The first point is the economic impact. The expansion of COVID-19 has a great impact on the economy as a whole, but especially in the employment of women. In Japan, the number of women employed decreased by 700,000 in April from the previous month. That's about twice as many as 370,000 men. One of the reasons is a high proportion of women in non-regular employment. Once women quit jobs for childbirth or childcare, they have little choice but to choose non-regular work. We have to create an environment where women can continue to work after childbirth. Another reason is that many women are employed in the service industry, such as travel, retail, and restaurant businesses, which has been directly hit by COVID-19. Furthermore, the burden of housework and childcare is mostly shouldered by women. Women with children do unpaid works about 5 times as long as men. When the schools and some childcare services were closed, the burden of raising children increased and mainly impacted mothers, and it became difficult for mothers to continue working. Gender inequality brought about severe impact on vulnerable people, such as single mothers. I worked with Japanese government to provide employment security support, including generous subsidy to companies, so that it covers most of the leave allowance cost for regular and non-regular workers as well. In addition, we provided financial support to households with a benefit of about $1,000 per person, including children. Furthermore, for single-parent families facing difficulties, we also provide about $500 per household. In addition to support for the vulnerable, we needed to take this opportunity to change the social structure more inclusive, more gender equal, and more resilient. We also need to foresee the change of economic structure and society, including digitalization. It is important to support women's vocational training for the employment in growing fields such as IT and nursing care. Moreover, teleworking and flexible work style have advanced. It will also lead to an environment where women can thrive. We need to accelerate such transportation through subsidy and technical support for small companies. The second another impact is on gender-based violence. The pandemic has restrained people from going out and increased concern of domestic violence against women. Her Excellency Ms. Mrambo Nukuka, Executive Director of UN Women, called this shadow pandemic. In Japan, the DV prevention law was enacted in 2001, and about 300 spousal violence consultation support centers have been established by local governments to assist victims. The center received 39,000 consultations during the 3 months from April to June this year, more than 20% increase from the previous year. In addition to the local support, we government opened a new DV consultation service on April 20 in order to respond to the increase and seriousness of violence. The new service has responded to about 13,000 consultations within 3 months from the start. The total number of consultations in May and June has increased by 60% from the last year. It is very much severe circumstances here in Japan. Domestic violence is very, very severe. Lastly, I would like to also introduce my endeavor to gather women's power to eradicate sexual violence in Japan, which is one of my life work. In recent years, victims of sexual violence and their supporters began to speak out. In response to the voice, the criminal law revision was realized 3 years ago during my Minister of Justice term. And the revision was, the law was revised for the first time in 110 years. And the government compiled a new policy package for combating sexual crime and sexual violence this June. The new policy aims to intensively strengthen perpetrator measures, victim support, and education. That's why I started to network with more than 200 local politicians who are willing to eradicate sexual violence. It is very important not to talk in the central government, but also the local government as well. So I urge the local politicians to make the network and then online meeting very much powerful. Last month, I organized online meeting to communicate directly with the local politicians, share latest information of national government and common understanding of local issues. It is a very powerful tool to strengthen political networking and promote policies based on the reality of local areas. We recognize it is facing a major turning point and whether great reforms can be implemented in the next few years will affect the future of our society. It is a time to build a new normal, which is truly inclusive and vibrant. We need to promote women's rights and gender equality through reform. Solidarity is a power to move the government and society. Solidarity between politicians and solidarity across the field can make things happen. I do my best to, and then I would like to network not only the domestically, but also very global situation. So this conference webinar is very important tools for us to battle and increase, upgrade the women's political situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You've touched on very numerous, all our honorable speakers today touched on very important points, care, domestic violence, and all of these important issues. So thank you for the points and you raised. These are very important issues. With this, we would like to move to, we have a good number of questions coming in from our attendees today. And I'd like to pick up on the first question that we received from a member of the European Parliament. Forgive me again for the mispronunciation. Sunchana Glavak. I don't know if I completely destroyed the name, but forgive me. The comment and question is, and this is open to all our esteemed panelists, as well as Silvana and Dr. Threya. Please feel free to jump in and respond as you would like. I would take an indicator from you that you would like to intervene when I see you unmuting yourself. So that would be the mark for me to give you the floor to respond to this question. And some questions are specific to certain speakers. The comment and question says, our societies have progressed in bridging the gender gap in the years of prosperity. There's a risk that gender gaps could widen during and after the pandemic, and that gains in women's and girls' accumulation of human capital, economic and political empowerment built over the past decade could be reversed. I fear that when the pandemic ends, women will be less employable due to the multiplication of their roles in the family, society, and business environment. When the pandemic is over, it would be good to see after a year how many women were forced to choose between a mother's role and a job. What are your thoughts on this risk, and what can you do to help and act together in this direction? So I open the floor to anyone who would like to take this question. Maybe I will take my privilege as a moderator to, if I don't see any unmuting, I'll go ahead and reach out to any of our esteemed speakers. Would anyone would like to address this question? Please, Your Excellency, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I think COVID or not, we are always facing the same challenges. But I think the question is right, that when we have economic, challenges, there is always a danger that we will reverse. So, but I think that there's no simple answer. It's just always the same, could you say, struggle or the challenge. And we need to use the best practices. I mean, what we have heard here today, we have heard some success stories. And it's important that we highlight them and we see what we have achieved and why we have achieved it. But it's obvious that this economic turmoil will mean that there is a danger that things will reverse in some areas. So but it's always the same thing, that we need to see why, when we have progressed, why is it? And I think that we are sharing some of the stories now. And it's very important to keep the gender eye on everything. And it's obvious for me everywhere, but especially in countries, in the developing countries especially, that we really need to focus on women and girls' empowerment. And I think that it's always important, but I think now at this time we really need to focus on it. But it's always the same challenges and same struggle. We will unfortunately not see in the near future that we will just lean back and say, okay, we have achieved everything we wanted. It's not going to happen, unfortunately.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'll get back to you because we have another question that is specifically to our male participants today. From Karina Radchenko, asking or commenting to His Excellency Mr. Barroso, thanking you so much for your efforts in promoting gender equality. The role of men is essential to reach gender equality and dismantle stereotypes. The men-led campaigns, both corporate and governmental, such as He for She, have proved their enormous efficiency. As gender equality basically starts at the youth level, could you please specify whether Goldman Sachs do have special targeted initiatives aimed at facilitating participation of boys and girls in as future professionals? And it has been specifically asked for Your Excellency, Mr. Thordarson, to complement and respond as well. So we'll start with you, Mr. Barroso, and then move back. Thank you.
No, as I said before, now that there is now a goal starting next year, 2021, to have parity at the youngest level. So those that come to Goldman Sachs, the youngest level, the analyst level, that's the lowest level in the, let's say, in the hierarchy, should be half women of men, or young men and young women, because usually they are very young. They come after making the applications for the stage, for a kind of a internship. So this is already the goal. It's, by the way, very much in line with the doctrine, if I may call it, of the UK Financial Charter that established this kind of goals at different levels for the corporate financial sector in the United Kingdom. Because I'm now chairman of Goldman Sachs International. It's based in the United Kingdom. As you know, Goldman Sachs globally headquarters are in New York. So but this goal that I mentioned is for global policy of Goldman Sachs, while the UK Financial Charter, naturally, it applies to the United Kingdom. So I believe it's very important, if I may make an additional comment, to address precise these issues of cultural gaps and biases. As it was already mentioned by some of you, including, by the way, Silvana, when she asked, when we think about a leader, what is the first image that comes to mind? Is it a male or a female image? In fact, there are deep issues also in terms of language. I remember the first prime minister we had in Portugal. I'm Portuguese. I'm now speaking to you from Lisbon. The first prime minister we had in Portugal that was a woman, it was in the 80s. It was relatively soon compared with other European countries. There was, because in Portuguese, like in Spanish or in French, we can make the gender in the title, prime minister. Prime minister in English is neutral, can be women or men, but in Portuguese or in French or in Spanish, you can say ministro or ministra, or ministro, and so on. In Spanish, ministra or ministro. So, and there was an issue. How are you going to call her? By the way, the Brazilians, they had now that decision when it was Dilma, President Dilma, the first woman president, and she decided to call herself Presidenta, not Presidente. So, in fact, there was not a word for this, you see? So we see that language also reproduces some of these stereotypes and biases. But things are changing, and we can also change the language. Sometimes it's reality that changes language, but sometimes it's language that can also change reality. This is why it is important to act at youngest level, at young level, through education. That was what I mentioned when I spoke before. Legislation, yes, but also some tools of incentives that can be developed in our societies, broadly speaking, in the broad cultural sense. And it's important that we do it at corporate level, at public entities level, or overall in our societies.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Thordarson, would you like to complement or add on the role of men and women? I'm sorry, men and boys.
Well, I think the short answer is that we need to participate and be active. And we also need to be role models. One thing is to talk about it, we also have to let it be shown in our actions. Because we will never achieve gender equality if the men are not active and boys. And actually, I can tell you that it happens relatively quickly because at least what I'm experiencing just in my family, that my boys are far ahead of my generation when it comes to gender equality. And it's actually been embarrassing when they are really teaching their fathers, the new norm, you could say. But we always need to be focused and have the glasses of gender equality. And one thing is that to change the law and the regulation and so on. And then is another thing, how does it come into practice? One thing I would like to mention, which has been worked not only with an Icelandic politician, but also with the business community, is a law that addresses the wage gap. And I hope that will be successful. It simply means that in companies in Iceland employing 25 or more workers are now required to obtain equal pay certificates from the government. And that is a small example of things that really, really matters. But we need to be sincere when it comes to gender equality. We need to be active. It's a business both for men and women, and especially both for political leaders, both male and women.
Thank you, Your Excellency. There is a question that is somewhat technical, and I'm confident we will find the answer. Is any gender budgeting analysis of COVID-19 crisis already made anywhere? I think the question is coming from Belgium, as they would like to do this in Belgium, and also for fundraising of the restarting post-COVID-19. So I don't know if that exists or anyone is aware of that and that we can share with our participants. A gender budgeting analysis of COVID-19 crisis. Okay, so maybe we can get back to that question once we find the answer. We have a number of interesting questions as well. Just need a few minutes to. There is a question that says, however important gender balance is, and it is, wouldn't 2020 be timely to start associating this noble cause to other political or social imbalances and discriminations, such as the lack of significant representation in politics and in companies of certain ethnicities, geographies, disabilities, religious nature as well? So the association of this cause with other political and social imbalances or discriminations. Who would like to take that question? Dr. Threya, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I think once we talk about inclusiveness, you've got to talk about inclusiveness of everybody. You can't be inclusive on women and leave the disabled, people with disabilities and so on. The whole concept of inclusiveness is an equal rights for everybody. And so I think, it's a principle that has to be applied across the board. And in many, many international agreements, this is repeated. Everybody, each segment is calling for the inclusiveness of its people. And I think it's an international demand that needs to be repeated in all, whenever we talk about inclusiveness, we need to talk about everybody, but then you need a focus because the needs are different. The responses could be different, but they are unified in terms of the right in leadership, right to express their views, right to get the services they need, etc. The details is on what kind of services and so on and so on. So I think we can agree that inclusiveness is across the board. Thank you, Salma.
Thank you, Dr. Threya. we received a question for all female leaders. How do you handle personal attack and disagreement from other women when promoting women leadership? In many cases, I found it is much easier to convince men rather than women how to convince them that we need change and we need to support each other. This is a question from Indonesia. So for our women speakers today. Silvana, you'd like to take this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'd also love to hear what my friend Yoko Kamikawa has to say, because I'm aware that very heated discussions are going on in Japan on including promotion matters for women, so it would also really interesting to hear her thoughts. But my answer to this would be that I can't exactly share this personal experience that it would be more difficult to discuss with women than with men. I found that this is very much in sort of an individual situation. Sometimes you have very tough discussions with other men, sometimes tough discussions with other women. So I couldn't really find that gender bias, but I, however, do understand, maybe that's also an experience that I had, that I just assume very often, and that's more like my assumption, I assume that because the person I discuss with is a woman, that we should have already the same opinion on women empowerment, and I'm maybe a bit taken aback if this is not the case. So, but that's more my assumption than the fact that it's more difficult to discuss or debate. At least this is my personal experience.
Thank you. Ms. Kamikawa, would you like to add, please? Thank you. You're on mute.
The question that the last one is very, very hard to answer. It's a kind of dynamism of the people, different from the issue and also the different from the membership. So it's hard to find the one point among the different opinions. But the important thing is to the important thing is to make some kind of goal or direction, and then discuss different from the different perspective and gather into the very final goal. So the important thing is to set a goal, and then a different person or different opinion, like climbing up to the different roles. So important thing to take time and then share the information and listen to the people's opinion. And then finally, we have to decide one policy among different alternatives. So decision-making process is very long this discussion among people, but finally we have to set in the final decision. So especially the very difficult problems, we have to take time and then research to outside and experience that common experience together, and then find the one solution. And I would like to comment on the first question that I would like to emphasize the digitalization, using digitalization. In Japan, the corona crisis seems to be opportunity to accelerate digitalization in various fields, such as work style, education, medical care services, and those leads to decentralization from monopolar concentration. Tokyo is very densely populated, so that the crisis in the urban area is very strong compared with the local area. So the people are now cannot go take up very transportation for a long transportation period. I mean, from the suburban area to go to the work site in Tokyo area. In Tokyo, 1 hour 30 minutes in the bullet train, one way. So,
Wow.
so the one day, 3 hours are taking the train. It's they find that it's very unusual, abnormal, abnormal before the corona crisis. So now we are gradually find that to using the telecommunication and then work style and then telework at home. So they manage the time and place. It's a kind of new awareness in order to battle the corona crisis. So I think that after corona or with corona and after corona society, we will be able to find the more comfortable and more inclusive society, both men and women, taking care of kids and work equally and using the leisure time, living together among the family. So I think it's a very normal situation after corona. I think compared with the other countries, Japanese situation is quite, I mean, unique. So it's very hard to compare with your situation, but in Japan, now we aware that kind of difficulty is now, I find that it's a chance to exchange structure economically and socially.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kamikawa. We have another question that we received by email for Your Excellency, Mr. Barroso. And the question is, and I'm really interested for the answer, how you managed to establish the tradition of a minimum percentage of women commissioners in the EU. You were the first to do that in 2004, and you know, taking, and now there's what you mentioned, the next step of moving to 30% parity. How did you manage to do that? Can you share with us?
It was, in fact, a joint action with the European Parliament, because the European Commission, to get approved, it has to be approved by the European Parliament. There are 2 votes, one for the President of the European Commission, the other for the College of Commissioners as a whole. And European Parliament was putting pressure in the European Commission. So that was the argument that I could use as President of the European Commission with my former colleagues, because I was Prime Minister and then I was designated President of the Commission, to say, look, if I don't have a sufficient number of women, there will be no European Commission. We will not be not getting the vote from the European Parliament. And as politicians, they could understand that. But of course, afterwards, there was a problem. It was, they think, why should I be the one who sends a woman? Why not another one? And then there was my work of persuasion. In fact, I once already used the word of soft blackmail. What I mean by that, I was telling them, look, if you don't send me a woman, I will give a very bad portfolio, not an important portfolio, because it's the competence of the Commission presidents to allocate different portfolios. And let me be very frank with you. In the European Commission, there are some portfolios, let's say, competition matters or economic and financial affairs or trade that are considered more important than others that are not so priority. And so I was saying, okay, if you send me that gentleman, I have nothing against that, but I will give him a second or third class portfolio. If you send me a woman, I will, if of course it's a woman of quality, I will give her one of the most important responsibilities. That was a negotiation. That's what European Union is. It's always a negotiation between different governments, between different institutions, different political parties. That's the way it is. At the end, we've got it. And it was approved by the European Parliament. And now I think it's already an established practice. I think today it's impossible to go for any commission in the future to try to get its vote without at least 1/3, but most in the near, it's already close to half, absolute parity. But I think it will be like that in the future as well, because these practices, the force, the strength of precedent is very important institutionally in the European Union, and I believe in most, let's say, organized political systems.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We have another question that we received by email. It says, being in politics requires to be elected, and to be elected, women need to have their campaign funded. But they face issues in finding sponsors. What can be measures or legislations put in place to ensure that women can run for politics and have the support needed? And this is open to anyone. Yeah, Silvana, please go ahead.
Well, I will try to answer that, but I think there is no one answer fitting all, because the systems of funding are so very different in the various countries around the world. In some countries, candidates rely heavily on fundraising, meaning they have to go out and try to convince people, companies to spend money, to donate money to their campaigns. In other countries, exactly that behavior is forbidden. So it's very different around the world. In countries, in many European countries, there is very restricted mix of financing for political campaigning. Some money comes from the party, some is reimbursement from the state afterwards. But aside from that, we found in Women Political Leaders work in a study that we have done in a first edition in 2014 and are about to do a new edition, which looks into the non-legal barriers for women in politics, that access to finance is indeed a critical point for women, and this is independent of where you are from. This can be the money for fundraising to get into politics, but then also afterwards, getting the access to the budgets that you need to make a policy idea that you have become reality. Because there are, of course, the ministers of finance, but very few around the world of women who assign budgets to the different portfolios. And it does make a difference if you have a very small budget as to be responsible for, or if you have a very large budget, or if you sit in a parliamentary committee that is relevant for a high part of where GDP is created. Let's say in Saudi Arabia, for example, the energy sector or the digital sector would be very important ones because they generate a lot of GDP. But there might be other sectors like automotive industry, which might not be such an important factor in the Saudi Arabian GDP. So there is a big challenge, and it's replicated not only, but if you look in politics, it's the same for women entrepreneurs getting finance for their business ideas. It's the same in, and thank you, for the International Day of Equal Pay. Thank you to Iceland for that, because again, also there in pay, it's a similar situation. So it's a crucial question to look at. Why is it that women have such a harder time to get to the finance compared to men? And it's not exclusive for politics, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Silvana. And I echo what you mentioned on International Equal Pay Day. I marked my calendar, Your Excellency, September 18th, and we will celebrate that date and make sure that everybody celebrates it. So I'd like to follow up, actually, Your Excellency, Mr. Thordarson. What system Iceland has, and probably the country with the almost non-existent gender gap in the world. What are the systems? Can you tell us more about the systems that the country has in place to ensure that that is the reality? And what can others learn from that?
First of all, I think that if we think that we have made some kind of perfect system, we're going to lose it very quickly, everything we have achieved. So we always need to be very critical. We, of course, very proud to be on this, on the top of this list, but we are very much aware of it's very easy to make mistakes and get too complacent, which is the most danger. What I think, I mean, these have been small steps. Of course, we have to say it as it is, that probably the most important things have been the women's role model. I think for my generation to have President Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, which is not only a woman, but she was also a single mother. And at the time she was elected, people said that there is no chance that a woman can be president, and definitely not a single mother. Well, actually, she was probably one of the best presidents we have ever had. She was absolutely fantastic and still is. And she broke the glass ceiling, so to say. And it's so important for everyone, both the young girls and also boys, to see these role models. And it's simply, and it's something that cannot be, the importance of a role model cannot be explained. But at the same time, we have a lot of small steps. Paternity leave, easy for kids to get affordable childcare and other things. Small steps, when all combined, means that we have achieved what we have achieved. But thank you for your nice question, and I'm very pleased that you're going to celebrate the Equal Pay Day. But it's very important never to be complacent. And of course, we have seen steps go back when we are too complacent, and that is something that we are trying to avoid as we can. But as I tried to mention in the beginning, there are a few things that have been successful and is important. The main thing is that we have to look at it that way. In my view, it's about equal opportunities, and we just have to look at it with a gender eyes. Is there something that is hindering young girls to achieve what they want because they are girls? And there's a lot of things we have done so far, but there's still a lot of things we need to do to be on the place that we want to be.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I see Mr. Barroso, and I see Dr. Thoraya, please.
I'm sorry, but it's just to say goodbye, because I have another, now we are full of these Zoom meetings, and so I just want to say goodbye, to thank you very much for this opportunity, to wish you all the best in your further work. It was a real pleasure to be in such a distinguished panel. So thank you, and I apologize, but I have another commitment, but we'll stay in touch. All the best for you.
It has been an absolute honor. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Dr. Thoraya, please go ahead. You're on mute.
Yeah, I was intrigued by the question, and I was very excited by the response of His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Iceland. And I just wanted to share quickly the issue of role models. You know, we had in 2013 the decision for women in Saudi Arabia to run for municipality. And we were really worried because usually when women enter into such public elections, very few make it as a first experience knowing the whole environment. And we discovered that 24 women made it rather than 2, which was a number that we never thought we will make. And partly when the votes were analyzed, it was the votes of men who allowed them to be elected. Partly, of course, it's the family, tribal, etc., but partly also the fact that they appeared as role models. They already have achieved changes in their communities. And the municipality is about providing services to communities. As your role models do make changes in the society at the various levels. I just wanted to link with a very advanced experience of Iceland with a beginner's experience in Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Threya. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm looking at one more question, and then after that, I have one. Actually, I have 2 questions. I don't know, Lucia, do we have time for 2 questions? Just to be sure. Okay, two quick questions, and then we'll hear final remarks from everyone, and we'll close. It's been a really insightful and thought-provoking conversation for sure. We have a question or a comment that says, we all know that COVID-19 has exacerbated gender gaps. However, we are still in the middle of a health and economic crisis. What do you say to those who say there are more pressing matters to discuss at this time other than gender issues? Silvana, would you like to take that?
Well, I think there are a few points to make. One is the COVID-19 crisis showed that women leadership is a fantastic leadership. There's been many data gathered now that countries led by women, including Iceland, are doing, relatively speaking, better to manage the crisis. And this goes from Norway, where the Prime Minister included children in consultations on what effects lockdown has, to very fast and adamant and empathetic management of the crisis. So I think that is one point. Then the other one, if we want to make sure that that the world that we have, that we live in, is maximizing its potential in terms of finding solutions to crisis, and this includes a COVID-19 crisis, it includes other crises as well, then it's really, it doesn't make sense to leave out half of the population in finding those solutions. We need to include all people with their expertises, with their views, with their opinions, both women and men and anybody else, to be part of this conversation and to be part of the solution finding. So I don't think that there is, that one should say there is a competition between this is more important than the other, but we can only find solutions to whatever is important if we include everybody. And so I don't see that there is an argument for delaying the discussions or steps to gender equality. On the contrary.
Thank you, Silvana. So with this, I would like to, we've come to the end of our webinar today. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to moderate this discussion. There are a lot of amazing questions, and I apologize for not being able to tackle them all and address them, but these are well received. And with that, I'd like to open for closing thoughts and remarks from our participants today. Ms. Kamikawa, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for participating in this very active and very important discussion relating to the women empowerment all over the world. I think I would like to comment on the importance of the education, especially for the young people. It's very hard to imagine a politician in a career path of women in Japan. But having a close access to the role model of female politicians, not only domestically, but also you, like you, who allows young girl to feel familiar with the politician and education and training for young people, very stimulated, and they are very empowered to meet you like your participants. So I believe that those measures will need to achieve equal representation for women in leadership positions. Many years ago, when the Hannah and also Silvana came to Japan together with a colleague from WPL and members of Iceland parliamentarians, and then top of GGI, the Iceland is the top among for the six years. In Japan, compared with Iceland, Japan is a very low position, 140 ranking from the top. But I heard the very hard experience, even in Iceland, they are still struggling. So I was very much empowered by that experiences. Now, still now battling with the women empowerment in Iceland. So I think to share the experience and also the difficulties in each country are stimulated us to how to combat the difficulties in to promote women in a political situation. Of course, funding is very, very difficult to get from the companies or each individual, especially in the political field. It is very hard. But the grassroots campaign is also very important, especially the women. So I think all those measures are not only this measure is very important, but also the very cohesive policies measures are very important, so that those measures are experiences transferred to the youngest generation, and then are very much stimulated, I think. So I would like to do my best to encourage young people. And now it is my role in Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Thordarson, you'd like to give final remarks, please.
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you for allowing me to be with you and address this important issue. And Silvana, of course, answered the question, which is always, I mean, it doesn't need to be COVID to be, we get this question, why are we not doing something which is more important? And she answered very well, like she always does. But it's amazing when you look at the countries which are the most gender equality, it also means that there is more economic growth. And what do we need now? We need economic growth. And also we have so much discussed today is that diversity when it comes to decision making makes decision better. So I think that will be my final remarks. It's a win-win game, and we should put forward, and it's a priority. It's nothing. It's not some luxury. It's a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Dr. Threya?
Just quickly, I know we need to close. 3 comments. One is that the Economic Forum study, the same study on gender gap, has indicated that it's not, they didn't talk about the COVID. They said that the pace of change in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, as we are moving now, it will take us 200 years. So it's not just COVID impacting, it's the changes are so slow and we need to speed up the changes. 2, that in order for us to guide policymaking and to know the question that came about the impact of COVID on gender budgeting, again, we go back to the need to have data so that we can monitor right after COVID, with COVID, and beyond COVID. So the whole area of sex disaggregated data is very important. My third point, and allow me, Your Excellency, I will use the words of your Prime Minister from Iceland. Basically, she said, why do we consider that the education is a cost and building a road is an expenditure? Education and health and so on should be an investment in human beings. And the road should be the expenditure. So we need to redefine the financial terminology. I call it humanizing the financial terminology so that the services that are for people become long-term investment in their life, and the infrastructures can be the cost. And when there is a budget, a need for a budget cut, we don't cut education and health, we cut the other things. So the whole area of rethinking about how we set our budgets and how we define them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thuraya. Silvana, we'd like to close with you.
Thank you so very much. And I could just, would like to just applaud all the other comments that have been made right now. I could not agree more. And let me close very, very quickly with saying that WPL, Women Political Leaders, is very proud to have these important partnerships like with W20, but also with the government of Iceland. And I would like to say that in November, we will have the Reykjavik Global Forum, which is co-hosted by the government and by the Icelandic Parliament, and where our dear foreign minister is one of the male champions in co-hosting this event. And it will be focusing on creating what we call the Reykjavik Manual, which will be an important tool for showing the way to for this new normal that we all talk about, for building back better, one of those other wordings, which includes that women in leadership is normal and not the exception, and that the many other things that we have mentioned becomes included in that. So I would like to all invite you to join this discussion, to join these conversations and to contribute to it, because if we come in partnerships, if we amplify each other's voices, then we all get stronger. Thank you.
Thank you all. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor once again. Thank you.